Welcome to the CIM breakdown video, California International Marathon 2023. I ran a 2:46:04 and I want to talk all about it today. Today's video is sponsored by Coros. Coros sent me their Pace 3 watch back in October, and I've been enjoying using it the past 2 months. Just want to break down some of the features that Coros has in this video and some of the data and how it helped me break down this race and learn from it and how to move forward into my Boston block. So without further ado, let's start off with the Friday, 2 days before the race. Friday morning, I took off from the airport from O'Hare. TSA pre-check is a godsend. If you're traveling a bunch, I highly recommend it because you're in and out real fast. I got to San Francisco by 10 a.m. local time, and I stopped at Linnea Cafe. We named our daughter Linnea. It was always the name my wife wanted. We went to this coffee shop back in 2014, and we ended up naming her this exact way because we went to this coffee shop, so I had to stop by. They gave me 3 buttons to bring home. Super sweet. From San Francisco, I drove to Sacramento. I decided to do that. If you're interested in running CIM, flights are more expensive and there are less direct flights into Sacramento with it being a smaller city. And San Francisco is only about an hour, 45-minute drive. So there are a lot more direct flight options from Chicago to San Francisco. So I decided to opt for that and get me in at a reasonable time without having to leave like way too early. And then also on my flight back home, I had like a 4 o'clock flight, 5 o'clock flight back home, which gave me enough time to travel back to San Francisco after the race since I traveled back the day of the race. So I pulled into town right around 1 o'clock, 12:30, 1 o'clock, and had lunch with my friends, John and Ulysses. These guys helped us out so much in navigating the course the year prior in 2022 when we filmed Joe for our documentary, because this was his peak race and the culmination of the film. And ironically, Joe and his new videographer, Drew, came and had lunch with us as well. So it just kind of turned into a party, which was super cool. And how things tend to go when you are with a bunch of friends in the same town running the same race. So obviously Joe was running it again this year. And so we got to see him. I did a shakeout after that. Just 5 miles with stride. So I went and saw the finish line, brought the GoPro, just kind of was doing my own thing. Hadn't really seen anybody else. Hadn't even seen Clark or his family who I was staying with. I was planning on seeing them later that night since Clark wasn't flying in until about 9 p.m. local time. I made that update video. I shot and edited it. Went to a Starbucks and just cranked it out and then posted it. So it was kind of setting the tone of just being like, okay, this is definitely feeling much more like an influencer kind of weekend than like an actual like peak race weekend. And I knew that was going to be the case going into this race, that it was probably just going to be more fun than serious. And if I could come away with something close to my PR, I would be happy. And so that's the kind of the way I treated it, because, as I get more involved in the running world and I'm starting to make it more of my career, I definitely want to make connections with people, not for the superficial reasons, but to literally just get to know people more. I'm not interested in making any kind of connections for the strict reason of business. I don't care for that. My photo, video business and this running business, if that's what you want to call it now, is diversified enough to the point where like I don't need any particular thing. And so that's a really sweet place to be in, and one that I've really enjoyed the past 4 or 5 months. And so just keeping up with people like Joe and meeting new people, keeping up with John Ulysses or seeing Kofuzi or Ben Johnson or all these people that I've come to know throughout the years is just an incredible feeling. And all being in the same place, carving out that time, having fun and engaging with it, that's really what I wanted this weekend to be. So just to kind of set the tone. Then had dinner with Joe and his friends. So we went to Beast and Bounty, a super nice restaurant in Sacramento that evening before I went and checked into the Airbnb with Clark and his family. So yeah, we enjoyed dinner, had some pizza that night, and just kept it really chill. No alcohol. We wanted to have some wine, but we neglected it. We knew we had a race coming up in 2 nights. So got to the Airbnb probably around 9 or 10 o'clock, and then went to bed pretty quickly after that. I'm going to break down all of my nights of sleep in a little bit here, but they weren't great. I really wasn't keeping a good eye on how much sleep I was getting or trying to get the amount of sleep I needed. So that could have been part of the reason, my performance. There could be a lot of reasons for my performance. It could be a bunch of things. I'm not going to make any kind of excuse in this video, as you'll come to realize in the end, the conclusion. But the next morning, we woke up at a reasonable time, had a breakfast, a simple breakfast.
All right, it's the morning before the race. How are you feeling?
I've kept saying indifferent. I'm like, I don't really know how I feel because it's not a peak race. And I don't really think the only other marathon I've run that's not a peak race was New York last year. And it was a nightmare. So I'm kind of like, but I'm in way better shape now. So I feel good. It's just fun. There's just a lot of people here and it's just really fun energy.
Second marathon, last marathon of the year. And I don't know, I'm just really looking forward to the opportunity to race with some really fast people and potentially even just race with you. Honestly, it's going to be our first intentional race together. We did run Chicago in 2022.
Yeah, but we didn't know
each other. Now.
I can't believe Eugene was this year.
Eugene was, yeah, and I don't know.
What was that, April?
April, like the end, like the last day of April.
Yeah. We were just saying how fast of a race it is with rolling hills, net downhill, but it's just so many fast people.
Everyone's here to either PR or time qualify, really. I mean, that's the purpose of this race almost. So they call it what it is, like the fastest race in the West Coast. So, and it is the last day legally to qualify for the Olympic trials, and the Olympic year is 2024. So this is going to be honestly the biggest field of competition probably you and I are going to be in for a good portion of our running careers, honestly. Yeah, cream or rice, everyone. It's better than oats because this will be the thumbnail. It's just carbs.
But then we headed over to the Shakeout Run, and I kid you not, if you saw Kofuzi's video or my friends over at All Heart Running Club, All Heart RC, they talked about how there's like 1,000 people at the Shakeout Run. It was absurd. There were just I've never seen so many people running at once. We literally took over the city. It was absurd, and it was super fun. And Clark and I got there like right as it started, so we only saw a few people said hi, and then just tons of you guys coming up after the run and saying hi and grabbing some selfies and just letting me know that you watched the channel. But it's so hard to comprehend how these videos connect with people in real life, and seeing those connections just continues to blow me away. So thank you if you came up and said hi. Please, if you ever see me out in public, do not feel afraid to come up and say, hey, I would love to have a quick little conversation with you. Get a photo if that's something you want. So yeah, just want that to be known. It was super fun. It was in conjunction with BPN. It was CIM's like formal Shakeout Run. We moved over to the expo right after that just because we were right there. And so Clark and I got our bibs, got our bags, got everything, stepped the BPN booth real quick, and then saw Kofuzi and Ben Johnson, interviewed Kofuzi real quick. What should my GoPro settings be?
I like 4K 120 frames per second, but CIM starts out so dark. So if you are going to run with it in a darker start race, I might drop down to 1080 and 120.
Okay, but this is for all the filmmakers out there. What do you think of 24 frames per second?
I always shoot at 30 frames per second. Because I've always been digital when it comes to filming anything. I mean, I've made a couple of like home videos on mini DV, but I've always been a 30 frames per second guy, and so 120 frames per second, video cameras, slow it down to 25%. So that's where I'm at.
Okay.
I have no formal training, and I'm just a guy that makes YouTube videos.
The truth is 24 frames on a GoPro looks pretty trash anyways. Right after that, Clark kind of went his own way. I went my own way with my rental car, and I got some more bagels from Target, and it was fascinating to see that their entire bagel wall was just destroyed. And so I ended up having to grab bagel thins. So it was like 2 bagel thins equaled 1 bagel. I was thankful I even got something. So I grabbed that and then headed back. Oh, actually went to Goodwill first, got some throwaway clothes for the next morning. It wasn't going to be too cold, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't feeling cold at all after we got off the bus. So I grabbed a double XL sweatshirt and a 49ers hat. We chilled at the Airbnb for like 3 hours, and I did my lay flat, and I can kind of cover that entire thing real quick just so you can see everything that I brought to the race. So I went with my Bandit singlet, again, the same singlet I wore in my half marathon in September, Chicago Marathon in October, same CLA cap that I wore in Chicago as well. I went with the Rabbit half tights this time because the Bandit half tights doesn't have a pocket in the back. So I went with the Rabbit ones to have an extra pocket because I was carrying my GoPro for this race and I wanted extra room for all my gels and the GoPro. I had Bandit socks again, and then I had 2 Morin 100 calves and then 4 BPN Go gels, the apple cinnamon flavor. And then up on the top left there above the bib, you can see my Coros heart rate monitor and the FootPod 2, which I'm going to break down a bit more in a little bit here. I did this lay flat, made this video, edited it up real quick, put it up on Instagram, and then we headed out for a BPN dinner, like the BPN team dinner. For lunch, I had leftover pizza from the night before, more bagels, and G1M Sport, the carb electrolyte mix from BPN. And we went to the same restaurant we went the night before with Joe, but this time with the whole BPN team, which was incredible, just to like meet everybody and formally like see everyone. And I actually stopped by the other team dinner that happened the night before that, met other people like Nico and Mitch Hamons, and just people that I've seen online for a while, and just super cool. At dinner, we had like plain butter noodles. They were super gracious in like bringing something really simple to us for more carb loading. I had like a kale Caesar salad and a bunch of bread and chicken, and just kept it, again, really simple, nothing crazy. Got to the end of that night, headed home with Clark, and we got to bed at a somewhat reasonable time, but I wanted to break down the whole sleep schedule. So I'll pull open my Coros app and go to the sleep section so you can see the exact sleep I got on each night. I've been really diligent about wearing my watch to bed to track my sleep the past few months, and it's been really interesting to see, especially the deep sleep part. December 1st, the day I got there, I only got 5 hours of sleep with, it was 36 minutes of deep sleep. And then the next night, this was not race night, but the one before, which is arguably the most important one, was only 6 hours, and I had 51 minutes of deep sleep. And then the night of the race, which was after this BPN dinner, I only got about 5 hours of sleep, and I had a little over an hour of deep sleep. So not terrible, but really December 2nd, that night before the night before, is the most important, and I didn't feel like I probably should have gotten another hour or 2 of sleep that night if I wanted to be fully rested. And so yeah, it's just something to account for. Again, and I said this in my race video, I want the kind of intentionality that I had in Chicago for every peak race. And I did not consider this a peak race at all, especially since I didn't get up to the mileage I really needed to have like another 240 attempt. And so it's just all this data is like further reinforcing the idea like you really need to be serious when you're approaching these peak races and going after your PRs. Definitely leading up to Boston, I'm going to make sure those 3 nights before the race I'm getting 7, 8, 9 hours of sleep, and really making sure I'm well rested prior to the race. What's also funny is the watch was telling me, I was looking at the race predictor before I left for Sacramento, and it was saying that I was in like 2:46:30 marathon shape, and I was kind of mad at it because I was like, I could do better than that. I can at least run like a 2:42 or 2:43. And sure enough, it was almost pinpoint accurate. That was even with the data from my Thanksgiving turkey trot where I ran like a 17:40, I think, with 300 feet of elevation. I was still fit, but you could tell I was on like kind of a descending trajectory instead of ascending going into the taper. I'm going to get into heart rate stuff, but I don't know what my max heart rate is. I'm going to do a test with my Pace 3 in January and just kind of see what it spits out, what it says. I assume it's somewhere around 185, maybe 190, because I never ever see any kind of heart rate metric, either with my old watch or this watch or with the heart rate monitor of getting up that high. Anyway, I digress. I'll get into that in a bit. But race morning, we woke up at 3:30 a.m. because the CIM website says you need to be downtown and ready at the most popular location, downtown Sac, to get on a bus at 4:30. And the buses take off at 4:30. And I knew from the previous year with filming Joe's race that it was chaotic, and I knew we didn't need to be there like at 4:30, but I wanted to make sure we did our due diligence and getting there as close to 4:30 as possible, so we weren't like setting ourselves up for any kind of failure. Thankfully, I still had my rental car, so that was a fail-safe. But if you're running CIM, you shouldn't really be worried about getting there like perfectly at 4:30. Buses are taking off all the way up until 5 a.m. from what it seemed like. So I got up, had 3 of the bagel thins, which equated to like 1.5 normal bagels with peanut butter. I had another mix of G1M Sport, 2 scoops of it in that shaker. I believe it's a 20-ounce shaker. Coffee and a banana as well. Got my first number 2 out at that point. Usually I go 2 to 3 times on race morning. I'm a weirdo like that. Got some Theragun in before we left as well. And then threw on my full race kit. And I put on the FootPod 2, the heart rate monitor underneath all of my throwaways. We drove my rental car from the Airbnb to a Spot Hero, very similar to what I did in Chicago, making sure that I could find a spot for the car. Since CIM is an A to B race, we got bussed out all the way to Folsom, which is 26 miles away from downtown Sacramento. And so I want to make sure that my rental car was available and ready post-race, very close to the finish line. So we got a Spot Hero spot in a garage as close to the finish line as we could find. That proved to work really, really well.
What up? Like the race thoughts?
Various thoughts
in the morning.
I need to poop.
I like the Christmas sweater.
Man, I told my family to pick me up some like throw gear, and this is what they came back with.
That's what
I just hope I don't like crap my pants on the bus.
Yeah. Have you been able to use the restroom?
I did once, but I usually go 2 to 3 times pre-race. Yeah. It's gonna hurt, but that's why we do it. Feel the pain, embrace the pain.
Run the pain.
We'll do it.
All right. Good luck, guys.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Ian.
See you over there.
Yeah.
So we got on the buses just after 4:30, probably 4:40, and then we got super fortunate and got a coach bus. And at that point, I started to feel like I had to go number 2 again. And thankfully, it felt like a godsend. There was a bathroom on the back of the coach bus. And so people started lining up for it, and I was like the second or third that got to go in and did my business for the second time. And then I felt like entirely comfortable the entire ride. I knew I can't stand that feeling pre-race when you're stuck on something. Like if I was on a school bus there and I felt uncomfortable, like I needed to go to the bathroom the entire time, I would have felt pretty miserable. And I just hate all that wasted mental and physical energy before a marathon. So felt super fortunate that I got on the coach bus. You're not guaranteed that if you're running CIM, so I'd say plan accordingly. It was about a 45, 50-minute bus ride, and then we chilled on the bus, which was super cool. They pull all the buses are lined down one road, and you can just hang on your bus and wait until you want to get out. And they're all heated, so it's incredible. We ended up, we knew it wasn't that cold outside, so we got out around 6:15 with the race start being at 7. Just wanted to get our legs moving a little bit, get over to Starters Village, and use the bathroom again if we needed to. Hung out with friends, saw Kofuzi, saw Joe, saw Nick, was with Clark the whole time, saw John. Just like as it goes on these events, I tend to just see everybody in these moments, which is just so cool. 30 minutes from race start, about 6:30, I took the Morin 100 calf, just like I did before Chicago, to get the caffeine in. And then the race was delayed for 10 minutes, I think because of a busing issue I heard. And so the gun didn't go off until 7:10, but right around gun time, I think it was around 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. And I think it rose to maybe high 50s or 60, which would be maybe 14, 15 degrees Celsius. Here we are again, me filming you at the start of CIM. What's new? The goal for this race, like I said, was to get somewhere near my PR, which is 240 or just under 240. And to run 240, it needs to be 6:06 per mile, which is 3:47 per kilometer. The goal through and through is just to be as steady as possible the whole first half and to get to the halfway point at 1 hour and 20 minutes. Really cool vibes in the starting corral. From all the races I've ever run, CIM's the only one that has they don't have an A, B, C, D corral. They just have different chutes based on your time. And so there's a sub 250 corral, which is super cool. And it's just so fun to be lined up with so many fast people. And, I chased a sub 3 for years. And so it felt really cool in the same way I talked about in Chicago to be in the A corral. It felt really cool to be around a bunch of other runners who have found the discipline to earn their spot in that corral as well. And CIM is crazy in that there are hundreds of runners under 3 hours, maybe even 1,000 under 3 hours, which is wild in a 10,000 person race. So even with the 246, I ended up somewhere like 715th place or something like that. It's a deep field and a lot of really talented runners who have put in a ton of hard work. So that's just really cool. And it helps in the process of just, running with people and feeling that energy and competitiveness as well. So the first mile, it's almost all downhill, that whole first mile. So you just feel like you're floating and you're just cruising with hundreds of people running that, around 6 flat pace, 6:05. And it felt like the first mile marker was off because I had the foot pod on and I know it's incredibly accurate and my pacing was right on. And I heard it from somebody else's video that it felt a bit off as well because it marked it, my lap marked at 6:15. So the first one was marked at 1.03, which I don't know. I tend to not care too much about numbers, but when I'm being that specific with a foot pod and a heart monitor and a watch and all these things, and I'm manually splitting every single mile, it's hard not to get in your head at the beginning of a race when you feel things like that. So went through that first one in 6:15, so it felt a bit slow. And so I kind of increased the effort a little bit. And you can see I completely blanked and didn't split my watch on the second mile, missed it. I think there was a crowd, and so I didn't split it again until mile 3. So my first 2 splits were 1 mile and then 2 miles. And you could tell that my second and third mile, I went a bit faster. I was hovering right around 6 flat because I think I was starting to feel like something was off, even though it wasn't. I think the first mile marker was a bit off. So that was kind of unfortunate because you don't want to burn any matches in the beginning, but I might have. If I look at that and then look at the heart rate as well, part of me was really excited to know my heart rate data in the race, but the other part of me didn't want to look at all because I'm like, it's not cold. Like it's not in the 40s. I know it's in the 50s today. And so I know that's going to increase heart rate. And I know that if I race a marathon and my whole first 10 miles isn't in the 150s, it's probably going to be a pretty difficult day. Like I remember looking at my watch in Chicago and seeing that my heart rate was like 157 to 159 around the 4 or 5 mile mark. I remember telling Sam that, and that gave me a lot of mental energy, helped me out psychologically a ton. And so it felt like the opposite in this race because I got to, 12 minutes in the race, 2 miles into the race, and I was already at 163, 165 in that range. And so I'm already looking like I'm in threshold. And so part of me really just at that point was like, okay, I know that data now. And so that could mess with me. But in all reality, it just gave me really good insight into where I need to be fitness wise. And it gets me excited about using these tools in my training leading to Boston and knowing like, all right, I need to be chilling in the 150s in these workouts to see if I have a shot at the paces I want to go moving forward to get more PRs. And so I knew that, and there were a good bit of downhills in the first, 10 miles. And so on the downhills, I was reading lower heart rates like 161. And so I'm like, okay, that's still manageable. It's still, 5 BPM within the range of where I was in Chicago. So maybe I can stick this out, grind it out, and manage it well. So just interesting. And I also need to talk about the hills at CIM. It felt like it was a really prevalent topic this year because I've seen so many comments online about how like if you get a PR at CIM, it doesn't even count because it's so net downhill. And if you look at the elevation map, which I have here, I'm not just saying this because Coros is sponsoring this. Like I'm super impressed with the foot pod too, because I went to CIM's website and they said that it's a 366 foot net downhill course. And my data says that it was 351. So it was within 15 feet of accuracy across 26.2 miles. My app says that it was 732 feet of gain and 1,083 feet of loss. Basically divide that by 3 if you want to talk meters. Yeah, it's super fascinating because look at this. Like look at the elevation map. on face value, looking at it, it looks unfair. It literally looks like you're just running down a mountainside, but that's just the way it looks in this specific scenario. You have to remember all of these small uphills they're not that small, especially coming from an Illinois boy. You know, like I'm always running on pancake flat surfaces. And so some of these divots, or you see these valleys, you know, 45 minutes into the race, like from 45 minutes all the way to 55 minutes, like that 10-minute zone, that's a lot of uphill climb. We're going from 197 elevation up to 240. And you might, some of you might be watching this being like, you're such a baby because you live in hilly places. I'm not used to that. So I didn't train that. Great insight to have, right? Like, and it zapped me. Like, it was clear that it zapped me in the second half. And it felt like so many people had the same story. Like, we were saying it at the expo. We were like, don't let the rolling hills trick you in the first 10 miles. Don't be fooled by that. Yeah, it's net downhill. Yeah, you see that elevation profile at the expo. Don't let it fool you. Don't go too hard on the hills. And it was hard. It was a lot of up and down, a lot of it. And obviously in the second half, you can see it flattens out quite a bit. But even, and I'll mention this as I get to later in the race, at mile 23, the J Street Bridge, that little bump right there, just about completely took me out. And it looks like a tiny little bump in the map, but it felt so significant at that point in the race. There's that at play as well. And so just know, if you're running CIM, don't let those comments fool you that this is just like some super easy net downhill, like you'll increase your PR by 3 minutes just because it's that much downhill. You have to prepare for it. That's just what it is. If I had prepared for it, maybe it would have been that outcome and so many other people's outcomes with going to that course to run a fast time, with it being the fastest course in the West or on the West Coast. It was difficult. I'll just be honest. All of my splits by 5K, I ran 1852. It was bang on, 604 a mile, 346 a K. All of my gel strategy, I remember I took the calf pre-race 30 minutes before. I took a go gel at mile 4. I took a go gel at mile 8. I took another Morin 100 calf at mile 12. And then I took another go gel at 16. And when it became not my race, I ended up not taking another gel, which probably made it that much worse. At mile 5, I was at 30-30. Which is bang on 606 average, 347 per K. At 10K, I ran a 37:38 down to 604 a mile, 346 a K. And at that point, Nick Bear caught up to me. And I'm not gonna lie, that was incredibly intimidating to have a 190-pound wall of muscle just like sneaking up behind you for like 5 miles. I kept looking back, like I saw the BPN media guys on the bike, and at one point I was like, "Oh, what's up, guys? Where's Nick?" And I turned around, he's like literally right behind me, just like hunting me down. And I mean, I was having a good time. I wasn't like super locked in, but he was so locked in, like in the corral. I remember looking back and he was just like staring into space, just so focused on nailing his goal that day, which he did. He obliterated it. And so I don't know, it was just kind of funny. And he stayed with me all the way until half. And I remember distinctly that it felt like he like pushed his foot on the gas a bit at that point and got ahead of me. And it was that point where I started chasing him. And so from like 13 to 15 or 16, I was keeping him just right in front of me or right beside me until I couldn't keep with him anymore. I read like a 119.47 on the course. My official half was 119.49. That's 605 a mile. That's exactly what I wanted to do. And I honestly felt great at that point, but you could see like visually at that point in the race, I was covered in sweat. The sun came out. It wasn't supposed to come out today. It was reading overcast, but it was full sun. And I think humidity was pretty high that day. I heard it was like around 80%, 80 or 85%. It started to get warm. I think it was a mixed bag of what people felt like. A lot of people were like, man, it got hot. Some people were like spectating and feeling warm spectating. And usually when that's the case, it's not super ideal temperature wise, but other people felt, other people in other videos are saying like, oh, it was perfect weather. So it totally depends on who you are. I do not do well in heat, and so that could have affected me a lot in the second half as well, but again, wasn't prepared for it. Yeah, so if I go back to my heart rate, so at 119.49, which is the halfway point, I'm chilling at low 170s. And so that's a very clear indication. Like I started touching 170 right at an hour 10. So around mile 11 and 12 and 13, that's where I started to jump into the 170s. And I know from experience that once I'm into the 170s, like this is the top end of my threshold, and there's only so long I can sustain that heart rate. And so you can see it dip on the downhills in certain parts, and then as soon as we start climbing again, you can see it rise. And so an hour and a half into 2 hours in the race, you can see that my heart rate starts to get to the mid 170s, up to 174, 175. And that's typically in a marathon race, in a half marathon race, where I can't push any harder. Like I know, and I obviously felt it, so I wasn't looking at my heart rate in the moment, but it's great to see it confirmed here, because you can tell that by, mile 17, 18, which would have been right around the 2 hour mark, you can see that my heart rate starts to dip back down to 170 flat instead of 175. And that's an indication of I started to take my foot off the gas a little bit, because there was no way I could have kept going at that pace without just stopping. That was just the reality, because I was like, okay, well, if I want to get serious about this race and be serious about the goal, like I need to start just being really focused. And by mile 18, I got this one clip where I recognized in the footage that it was starting to get hard. That's 18, starting to struggle. Keep finding something. I obviously knew I couldn't sustain it there, backed off a bit. The heart rate indicates that as well. And I wanted to walk so many times after mile 18. Every small uphill just felt like a mountain. And when you're running, six flat pace, or, what you're capable of running in a marathon, once you start letting off the gas, it feels like you're running so much slower than you actually are. Even when I was getting into mile 19 and 20, I was down to, maybe 6:30 mile pace, around 4 minutes a K. And it felt like I was running a full minute and a half slower than my race pace. It felt like I was starting to get into 7:30, 8 minute flat. I think your mind starts to mess with you in those moments, especially because people are starting to overtake you. It's really hard to recognize. So I kept looking back at my watch and reassuring myself, like, you're still running under 7 minute miles. Like, you're still running a 6:30, a 6:45. Like, you can still get a decent time here. Just hang on, just keep going. And the experience that I had in New York City last fall really stuck with me, because I was completely fried by the halfway point at New York City. My heart was up in like 180, and I started walking right after half. And that killed me, that race. The whole second half of the race, I couldn't string together. I don't think I could string together a single mile or 2 miles in the second half of that race without walking. And I remember someone commented, like, why don't you just lower your pace significantly and just try to keep running? And that stuck with me, because I've never been one to do that when I'm really struggling in a marathon race. And so that sentiment was really resonating with me in the last 10 to 15K of this race. It was like, just lower your effort and don't stop. And the fitness that I gained over the summer and fall held me through those miles, because I did do two 2 mile splits. So everything is 2 behind in the second half of all these splits. So the 16th split is mile 18. That's where I started to fall off at 6:18 a mile, 6:21, 6:31, 6:41. All the way up to mile 22, I was still under 7 minute miles, and I only clocked 3 miles above 7 minutes. It was just such an insane mental game. And I said post-race in Kofuzi's footage, I said it was so lonely. It felt so lonely, because I didn't feel like I had anyone to go with in the last 15K. It just felt like there were so many times where there was 1 to 3 runners like 50 feet up the road. And it just felt like I was out in the open. I was completely alone, and people were just slowly overtaking me. And if I look at the numbers, I only got overtaken by maybe 50 people in the race, but it did not feel like that. It felt like I was being overtaken by hundreds of people. Again, your mind just really starts to mess with you. And so if you can get into a very disciplined mental place in tough races like this, where it's just like, just take it mile by mile, that was what I had to do. And it proved to be super helpful, because I didn't stop. And I can't believe I didn't, but I wanted to make it a point, prove it to myself, and just have an effort that I could look back on and feed off of, knowing that when I am in peak shape for, Boston in April, when I'm feeling that way, just remember back to this race. Like, you are mentally fit enough to not stop and to maintain. And with good fitness, I think that will be really helpful for me mentally and psychologically at a peak race like that. As I mentioned, mile 23, that J Street bridge just about annihilated me. I was filming at that moment, and that was the closest I was to stopping and walking. And it literally felt like I was walking. I don't know if you could call it running on the incline of that bridge. But I got over the 35K mark, I think, at that point, and then it pancakes out a lot more on the course through the end. The hardest races I've ever done. Didn't stop though. 3 more minutes of pain. Come on. Come on. Yeah, I picked up the pace in the last 400 meters. Obviously, I'm going to do that every time I, smell the finish line, and got up to around, sub 6:30 a mile pace. Definitely not my fastest finish, and you can tell I'm completely cooked in the finishing footage. And was greeted by so many friends. Clark snagging his sub 2:37. He had the race of his life, a 2:36.56. So proud of him and all the hard work he has done this year, and even getting through an Achilles injury this fall. Super, super impressed with him and what he's been able to string together. Go check out his Instagram. I saw Kofuzi, which was super cool. Saw John, he was photographing me. Saw Clark's family. Saw tons of people who stopped me to say they watched the channel. Super grateful that you guys came up and said hi. Got to congratulate Nick on his 2:39.20. Got me by 9 seconds on my Chicago time. I'm just like, oh. So I guess we'll have some friendly competition with a new friend now. I had mixed emotions at the end of this race. I was super proud at my effort in sticking through, but it felt very dissatisfying. To be so closely removed from a PR race like Chicago and to taste like a 6.5 minute slower race, it hurt in a certain way, and it I think it was good in that it's making me really hungry for a fast time in Boston. And I'll be announcing all of that stuff soon about what my plans are there. I'm still lining up potential coaching and all the new things that are going to be happening in that series. So stay tuned with that. There are no excuses. Like I can, talk about my heart rate. I could talk about the heat on the day. I could talk about all these different factors. At the end of the day, it's on me. I did not train the way I needed to leading up to this race to have a PR effort. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, maybe I could take a crack at that. And I think so often as marathon runners, we fool ourselves into thinking maybe I can carry that fitness over and do something special. And the reality is 99% of the time, this distance does not allow you to just pull something out of your rear end. It challenges you in a way that I think no other distance does outside of ultras. And with it being that your glycogen stores are completely depleted after 2,000 calories, and there's all these factors about that distance wrecking you, that if you don't prepare for it in a peak way and taper down and get enough sleep and rest and carb load and do all these incredibly intentional things, and you don't dial yourself in, it's gonna be incredibly hard to do what you are capable of if you've already proven what you're capable of. I proved that I was capable of a sub 240 marathon in Chicago, but I did not do what I needed to do to replicate that in Sacramento. And so that's completely on me, and I fully recognize that, and there's no excuses, and I will do that for Boston. And as I said, that wasn't really my intention with this race. It was much more of a, let's see what I can do with less volume, with less intentionality. And I think the clock pretty much proved what that was. And it's still my second fastest marathon, which is really cool. Over 2 minutes faster than my spring marathon, which is wild to think about. The fact that I ran 3 marathons under 2 hours and 50 minutes this year, I never could have imagined that for myself. So I'm enthralled with all of the connections I've made in the running world, and I feel like I'm leaving Sacramento and CIM with so many new blossoming friendships and amazing new connections, and I'm just thrilled going into 2024 I'm just thrilled going into 2024 and everything that is going to happen. I'm signed up for Boston. I am officially signed up for Chicago. I don't know if I'll get into Berlin. We'll see if I can snag a bib there, but definitely Boston is my peak race in the spring, and either Berlin or Chicago it's looking like in the fall. I want to thank Koros for sponsoring this video and being a part of this build up to CIM and giving me the Pace 3, and I've been loving it. One more thing I wanted to mention about this watch, I had it at 100% charge on December 1st, the day I left for CIM. It is now December 12th, and I ran 2 shakeout runs, an entire marathon, 3 or 4 different workouts, walking and a run yesterday, and I'm still at 12% on this battery. So it's insane. I'm looking forward to using this and the FootPod 2 and the heart rate monitor in my training leading up to Boston, all the things that it's going to help me with. So thank you for tuning into this. Thank you for sitting through the entire thing if you're here at this point, and I look forward to seeing you for the last few videos at the end of this year, leading into all of the Boston series in the winter and spring. I will see you soon. Till the next time, Floberg runs. I'll catch you there. Peace.